have all my materials ready to make this pieced sunglasses case. I have hooped stabilizer. This is a poly mesh cutaway. I have the batting and 4 different fabrics that are going to be used on the front side. Then you need another piece of material that's folded in half with the batting inside. This will be the back part of the sunglasses case, and then the lining fabric that will be going on the opposite side of the pieced fabric that's on the inside. I will probably use red thread for everything in this design because the stitches actually don't end up showing at all in the finished product. So let's head to the machine. I have the design file loaded on my machine. I'm stitching this on a multi-needle in my 5x7 hoop, which is oriented in the horizontal direction. So my design file is oriented in the horizontal direction. And I have it so that the top of the design file is on the left-hand side of my hoop. That will be important for the step at the very end. If you're using a single needle and it's oriented vertically, then the way the design file is loaded is just fine. So the first thing I need to do is lay down the batting and top fabric. And if you're using directional prints, you'll just want to pay attention. This is going to be the top of the sunglasses case, and my fabric is slightly directional. They've got little raindrops, so I'm making sure they're all oriented the right way. So again, I said I was going to use red thread for every step. So the first step is simply tacking down everything. All right, the second step is a placement line. All right, the next stripe that I want to use is green. So what ultimately I'm going to want it positioned this way so the teardrops are falling. So I'm going to flip it up and line this up with that stitched line. So there's my placement line. I'm putting the fabric right alongside that because the tack down stitch is going to be about 1/4 inch away from that. You could tape this in place to keep it extra secure, but our next step is to fold this down. And if you have a mini iron and you want your seams to be really crisp, you could remove this from the hoop and iron that down. I'm just going to kind of tug it down in place and use my little finger press and then stitch the next step, which will be the placement line for my third fabric. Okay, here's a step that I'm going to add that isn't included in the directions. I'm going to go ahead and trim away this excess fabric. The directions don't say to do that, but by the time I add my third and then fourth fabric, there's going to be several layers of fabric down here at the bottom that I don't think is necessary. So let me just trim this off real quick. And then I can save this scrap of material for another project. All right, next up is going to be blue. Again, I want the teardrops going this way, so I'll flip my fabric over, align this with that stitched mark, and tack it down. All right, I'll fold that. So a quick little finger press. And then my last fabric is going to be this red. So I will lay that down. to trim this blue off real quick before I do that. Okay, now line up the red and tack it down. And fold this down in place. All right, the next step is going to stitch some important placement lines. All right, these little notches are where you're going to line up that folded piece of fabric. This folded piece of fabric is going to become the back side of the sunglasses case. And the layer that you put face down is going to be what appears on the back when you turn it right side out. So for example, I want this to mirror yellow, green, blue, red, yellow, green, blue, red. So I'm putting that face down and I am lining it up with the little notches on the left or right. It's very important that it doesn't cross past those marks because then otherwise your entire sunglasses case is going to be closed up. So when you get it in position where you want, you could put a little bit of tape down. So we make sure this is tugged down in place and this is laid down because our next step you'll see is going to stitch 3 sides of a rectangle. Okay, the final step is going to be adding on the backing fabric. This fabric will be the back side of the front panel for the sunglasses case. And in this case, you want it to completely cover the rectangle. You want probably like a good 1/2 inch all the way around. And you don't have to do this because it's going to be the lining, but I'm going to go ahead and try to match up my chevron stripes and make sure that it's on straight. And then I want to comment real quick and explain why I said I wanted the top of the sunglasses case on this side. Right here, it's very thick. It's thicker in this section than it is here. And I find if I have it flipped so that the top is over here, the way my foot is designed, it really makes a lot of noise because the thick part of the foot is hitting the thick part of the fabric. And so if I have it flipped so the top's over here, it stitches a lot nicer. All right, we are finished sewing. So at this point we go to the cutting table to trim it up and invert it a couple different times. At this point, we're going to trim 1/8 of an inch all the way around these edges, except right here where there's an opening, we're gonna leave a bigger spot. So let me do that and then I'll come back and show you the results. Okay, I now have trimmed around 1/8 of an inch around these sides, leaving this flap open, and clip the corners to make it easier to turn. Make sure you do not actually cut the stitch line. Now what we need to do is grab, here's the opening. So one side of the opening is just one fabric and one side of the opening has a whole lot going on. You want to pull these 2 fabrics aside and then trim everything else as close as you can to the stitch line at that same 1/8 of a 1/4 inch. And remove that. All right, so now at this point, we are ready to invert into this hole. All right, let's invert this through the hole. I find it's easiest to grab the opposite corner and push it through first. And then you can just kind of tug and invert as you go. Those were good double tack down stitches with tie offs at the beginning and the end. So can put a little effort into it. Once we've got that inverted, then we'll need to push out the corners as good as we can. And I've got a little tool over here that I like to use for that. So we can kind of push out those corners without busting through the corners. All right, so don't be alarmed if right now it looks like your project is inside out. It is inside out, and that's okay. We're gonna do one more flip after we close this hole. Okay, so you wanna get it all kind of smoothed out as best as you can. And we've got these two pieces of fabric to deal with, and so what you wanna do is fold them under into that hole. And you could whip stitch this opening up by hand. I actually prefer to use something like Steam a Seam Light. And so I'm gonna do that. Before I put that in there, I'm gonna iron this just a little bit to hold it in place. Those seams are bulky because it's got 2 layers of batting plus all that fabric right there. And this doesn't have to be the neatest thing because it won't be seen. This is going to be at the bottom of the inside of your sunglasses case. And since it's just for sunglasses, you don't have to worry about change falling into a hole and getting lost inside. Okay, but using Steam a Seam, we'll get that nice and secure. Okay, so again, this is the inside of the case. The last thing we want to do is flip out the opening. So you turn it inside out, and then you will have your pieced sunglasses case. Okay, so again, you can kind of poke out the corners a little bit. And there you have it. This will be your front side, pieced with the 4 different strips of fabric that you used. And then this will be the blank back side. All right, there you go.